Welcome to the Game of Life podcast, where we bring you inspiring softball stories, insightful tips from coaches and players, and explore how the game transcends its boundaries to become a metaphor for life. Whether you're a sports enthusiast, a casual fan, or someone just looking for inspiration, you're in for a treat. We'll unravel the tales that go beyond the scoreboard. Discover how perseverance and hard work on the field translates into resilience in your daily challenges. Learn about teamwork, leadership, and the unwavering spirit that fuels success, not just in sports, but in the game of life. All right. We're in another episode, another guest. We've got a special one on. I know Mr. Tom Casey from way back in the day. Tom's still a mentor in my schools. Allie, I think you're one of his biggest fans, and he may say the same about you, right?
Will.
Yes.
Will.
Yes.
I will.
So, Tom, let's get started.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is the Game of Life podcast. It's different from the one Matt and I do that you've been a guest on. But there's a lot of similarities, and the themes are the same. We're trying to just implement, well, we do two things. Correct me if I'm wrong, Allie. We try to exemplify the fact that sports are a platform for everything you do in life and symbolize a lot you do in life. And we also talk about how to cope with getting through tough times in sports, tough times in life, hence the name. Start filling in where you want to fill in, and we'll start asking questions and get this thing rolling.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. I guess, one thing that I'll say to everybody right out of the gate is that I've had the great pleasure of being a people leader for 25 years now, in the industry that I'm in. And Paul, you and I talk about this a lot, and I've mentioned this a lot to your classes. I'm a big believer that storytelling is one of the most important skills that you can develop. In fact, if you believe the people who are supposed to be smart enough to come up with this stuff, but storytelling itself is the number one most profitable skill that there is in 2024. And just think about how many people are comfortable doing it and how many people are not comfortable doing it. And one of the things that I always say to folks is that for those who know me, I have a process for everything, right? Process over product. We talk about that all the time, Paul. And I truly believe that there's a process for storytelling, and it's built around what we call the rule of three. And as I was thinking about what to talk about, I was thinking to myself, what's Paul Richmond going to ask me to talk about? And then the rule of three was the first thing that came into my head. Just because
you know her well.
Yes, we know each other well. But the rule of three is a process that I use all the time to tell stories, and it's become sort of my knee-jerk, sort of default mindset when it comes to telling stories. The first rule of three is that we're taught since elementary school that there's a beginning, there's a body, and then there's a conclusion, right? There's three parts to a story: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, that's true. That's one way to sort of think about building a story and building a conversation. But the way that I try and tee it up to people is, okay, what's the reality? What's the problem? What's the solution? So what reality am I dealing with? What problem can I solve? And what solution will actually solve that problem? So just breaking it down in your head into chunks of three is sort of that first pillar of the rule of three. The second pillar of the rule of three is less is more. It's not about what you have to say. It's about what you don't have to say that's important. And think about that. We love talking about things. In my world, I live in the sales arena. Here's a newsflash for you: salespeople like to talk, and we like to talk a lot, right?
Really? No, I'm kidding.
It's not about what you have to say. It's about what you don't have to say that's important. So what do you need to take away from a conversation? And then the final pillar of the rule of three is actually built on brain science. It's impossible for us to remember more than three things at a time. That's it. You can't remember more than three things at a time. In fact, once I start talking about more than three things, all of a sudden the brain starts to shut down. It just can't do it. So that's sort of the rule of three in a nutshell. But what I try and do is use that to help build out stories. Certainly ahead of time if I have the opportunity, but even off the cuff, it's just sort of become a default mindset.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I think one thing I want to touch on there too, going back to that first part of kind of the parts of the story, how often do you find people focus more on the problem and less on that solution piece at the end? Because I think one thing I find is people like to talk a lot about the problem and then they just kind of end the story there,
Yep.
where the part I'm more interested in is what are you going to do about it?
Yep, that's exactly right. First of all, you'd be amazed how many people don't take the time to understand the problem in the first place. Or even perhaps more concerning than that, they sort of misidentify the problem, right? So they don't truly understand what the problem is. And the only way to truly understand what problem that you can solve for somebody is to ask them, is to have a conversation with them. And it's easier to understand what your reality is and then sort of ask them, all right, what can I solve for you, and then how can we solve it together? And we do hear that all the time. People just sort of put the cart before the horse, right? They try and identify something that they don't even know is there first, and that can send the conversation sideways, especially when, I mean, think of yourself, whether it's a conversation with a family member, a conversation with a boss, a conversation with an employee, a conversation during an interview. You're there to solve the problem, but you can't really solve the problem until you understand what the problem is. Good point. Good point.
I am assuming it's better in person to do all this versus a Zoom.
No, it's the same thing. It's the same. It's the same mindset. It's the same mindset. Think about this. Think about how important this is. One of the things that I interview people a lot, I have the opportunity to interview people a lot. And the one thing that we always say is the best story wins. The best story wins every single time, not sometimes. The best story wins every single time. Now, think of the interview world. Think of the world that we're in now. Think about how things changed completely in 2020 when we had COVID, right? Some people, heck, I didn't even know how to spell the word Zoom when 2020 came, right? So it's become embedded into what we do every single day. I tell this to people all the time. There is a really good chance that most of the interviewing that this new generation of professionals do, actually your generation included, Allie, most of the interviewing that you do will be virtual.
Yeah.
You may not even have the opportunity to sit with somebody face to face, eye to eye, to exchange ideas and exchange thoughts.
Oh.
So you can make a really strong argument that your virtual presence, the way that you show up virtually, that'll determine many of the opportunities that you get.
Agreed. I completely agree. And I think one thing too is I think one of the most powerful skills that you can have is being able to have a conversation with anyone at any time. And I think sometimes that's really, really hard to do over Zoom. So I guess for you, what advice do you have, for someone in a younger generation who's kind of becoming accustomed to just being online, having your camera off, just kind of blending in with everybody else? What advice do you have for them to stick out and be able to actually have a meaningful conversation, ask questions, and engage?
First of all, Paul, you can't start laughing at me when I start saying this stuff, because you've heard me say this about 5 billion times. It's an involved conversation. Here's what I tell people all the time. What if I told you that the effectiveness of the virtual conversation that you have with somebody starts way before you turn the camera on? Way before you turn the camera on. And you can kind of see my surroundings here.
Yeah.
Right. So the question that I always have for people is, what does the area around you look like when you do a virtual interview? Because believe it or not, let's just talk about the brain science of this. And this is going to shock the two of you, but believe it or not, I'm a natural introvert.
What?
I am actually not a natural optimist at all. So all of the virtual interviewing, and by the way, being on either side of the camera, but all of the virtual interviewing that I do takes place right here in this room. So I know that most of the stuff that's important from a professional standpoint that I do takes place right in this room. So think about it. I've tried to be intentional with this. I need to set up an environment that doesn't give me a choice whether or not to be an optimist, and it doesn't give me a choice whether or not to be extroverted. So my goal when I walk into this office is, oh my gosh, how can I not be in a good mood when I come in this office? I've got all sorts of cool memories. And of course, it's an ode to my two children. Don't ever tell them that, by the way, Allie. All right. One's over there, one's over there. But don't ever tell them that. In fact, I'm not going to pull it. Inside joke here, folks. I'm not going to pull it out, but there's actually a fat head of Jillian right there. Yeah. I swear to you, it's right there. I could pull it out, but it would be way too much of a distraction for me. So my whole point is, what I have done, what we call that, there's a really cool, smart business word for all this stuff that I'm talking about. It's called staging your area. So my area is naturally staged. I don't have to do anything about my environment ever. It's already set. It's one thing that I don't have to think about. So now what I've done, I've created brain space for other stuff that's not this, right? So that's my environment. Now, let's get into the interview itself. First of all, these things don't sneak up on you. They don't catch you by surprise. They don't pop up on you without you knowing about it, right? So as I'm interviewing for a couple different opportunities within my organization right now. What you can't see right now around my desk, I'm completely prepared for those interviews. So if I have an interview at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, when we're done here, all I have to do is leave the room. I don't have to think about it at all, because I know when I come in here at 7:30 tomorrow morning to get ready for this interview, my area is all ready to go. It's all ready to go. It's something that I don't even have to think about. Those two things alone, my environment and staging my interview area, give me a competitive advantage over everybody else who has to worry about that stuff when they get on the computer. Now, the interview itself. Camera always on. That's my rule. Camera always on. Somebody asked me one time, Tom, why is your camera on? Every single meeting that we have, no matter what it is, why is your camera on all the time? You know what it is for me? It's structured accountability. I have to be present. It forces me to be present. And by present, I don't mean being the first one to talk. I don't mean being the first one to say anything. I mean the first one to be mentally engaged in a conversation. So it holds me accountable. It holds me accountable for bringing the most value that I can bring to that conversation. So outside, so camera's always on, always in front of the camera. I tell this to people all the time. Do me a favor, please, 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 please. Always make sure your camera is at eye level. Please, I'm begging you. I'm begging people, please make sure your camera's at eye level. I don't want to talk to your forehead. I don't want to see your ceiling fan. I don't want to see your dome light at the top of your ceiling. Take care of that stuff ahead of time. Second thing, natural lighting. Now, it's not daytime. If it were daytime, it would be super easy because I have two windows. I have a sliding glass door. I don't even have to use lights because light comes shining in here. But there's a light above me. There's a light next to me. There's a light behind my camera. Oh, and by the way, this proves that I walk the walk. Just in case I need it, there's always a ring light next to my desk.
That's awesome.
Always a ring light next to my desk. So lighting has to be right. And then finally, I wish I could show it to you. I wish I could pull the two of you into my office right now. What you'll see, I am standing in the middle of a taped off square on my rug, because you two know me a lot better than most people know me. I can get really animated when I talk, and I can tend to move around. I tend to sway. I tend to wave my hands and my arms. That can be a distraction to some people when they're trying to interview you. So that takes away a lot of that stuff. So all we're doing is a virtual interview, right? But I just talked about a ton of stuff that will absolutely set you apart during a conversation with somebody. And you would not believe what I've just said probably sets you apart from probably 80 to 90% of the candidates you will ever be interviewing against. But it all goes down to one thing. And I know this will put a smile on your dad's face. How you do something is how you do everything.
Great.
So if I show up to an interview with this kind of intent, the subtle, maybe not so subtle message that I'm delivering the person who's interviewing me is, look, this is how I do everything.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree. I mean, I always feel a little bit weird when I go on a meeting and everybody has the camera off, and I'm like, this would be like me being in person and closing my eyes. Like, it takes away an entire element of a conversation. And I've just kind of gotten to the point where even if I'm the only one with it on, like, I'm not embarrassed by that anymore. And what most of the time, what happens is if I turn mine on, so does somebody else. And now the conversation just goes so much better because there's no wrong interpretation. They can see my body language, they can see my inflection of my voice, they can see my enthusiasm. It just totally elevates the level of the conversation. It sets you up before you even speak to somebody else.
Or you'll hear people start to give you the reasons that they don't have their cameras on, right? You'll hear people start to verbalize why they don't have their cameras on.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? But you're right. It's a domino effect. Once you break the ice, once you start to do it. And what I have found over the course of time, all of a sudden, these regular calls that I'm on, people just have their cameras on all the time. Because that's what happens over time. It's almost contagious, to be honest.
I don't understand it. Like, if you're talking to somebody, again, I try to treat this as in person as possible.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? Like, either the conversation's not important enough to warrant the camera on, or turn the camera on and be present and have a good conversation.
And honestly, it reminds me, it almost seems like a escape for someone not to have to answer or be engaged, because if I can't see what you're doing, I can't tell that you're engaged. And it's like texting someone, right? Like, they don't have to respond because there's no accountability. If I'm talking to you face to face and you just don't respond, that's now very obvious that you're not engaged in the conversation.
That's exactly right.
Whereas if your camera's off and I say something, I'll just keep talking and fill the space because I don't know what you're doing.
That is exactly right. That's exactly right. And what I have found over the course of time, let's just say something happens. Let's say I'm at an appointment and I have to join a call late, and I get on and I don't turn my camera on. I'm less engaged in the conversation. All of a sudden, I feel like it's like leaving your house without your watch on or something like that. I feel like there's something missing in that conversation. So it's cause and effect. There's absolutely no doubt. There's cause and effect to all of this. But I'm telling you, I mean, listen, I've interviewed people for 25 years. I mean, Paul, we talk about this all the time. When people intentionally show up like that to a conversation, it just hits different. It just hits different. I was interviewing with somebody the other day who didn't even know me. As soon as I turn my camera on, they see all this. And it's just different. It's just different. They remember it.
Yeah. And going off that too, I want to transition into the sports realm a little bit, as I know that's a topic that's important to us. So for a little bit of background for everyone, so Tom's daughter Jill, or Jillian, I played basketball with in high school, so a really good friend of mine, and she went on to play D1 basketball as well. So definitely a a good bond we have with their family. And one thing I was thinking about too while you were talking, especially about the part of yourself not being a natural extrovert, it kind of brought me immediately to sports, right? Because I have had a lot of successful teammates in the past who are very introverted. And then that whole idea, right? Like thinking about an interview, that could be a tryout. That could be trying to get recruited. How do you sell yourself in that aspect? Because how you do anything is how you do everything. So
Yes.
if
Yes.
you're, trying out for a sport and you just say, oh, I'm introverted, like take it or leave it, that's
Yeah.
not going to work. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on both of your thoughts on that as well. Of if you're, someone who maybe struggles with that, how do you set yourself apart still and kind of get out of your comfort zone in that realm?
Let me start quick. I'm just going to do a quick summary because
Yeah.
I think everything Tom's talked about so far answers that question. Now I'll
Yeah.
let Tom go into detail. Process over product, the rule of three about the process telling stories, right? Structural accountability, camera on, selling yourself. I was going to say before Allie transitioned, how could a young teenage athlete use what you were talking about to get to college? And I think I'm going to let you do the talking now, but it's been a great transition, Allie, and I think everything we spent the first half of this podcast talking about is going to turn to that now, I feel.
So I'll start with this. So Allie, I have a question for you.
Okay.
You know Jillian better than almost anybody knows Jillian.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that Jillian is an extrovert or an introvert?
Introvert.
Introvert. That's exactly right. She's an introvert. So first of all, apples have apples, in case y'all don't know that, right?
Yeah, look at me and my dad. There's another.
Yeah. Well, you said it,
extra.
not me. You said it, not me. But think about it. But think about what sports has done for her. So one of the things that we've always preached. So here's the analogy. We talk about the camera always being on. I talk about the camera always being on, standing up in front of your camera. Well, what did we preach to all of you every time we spoke to you? Well, guess what? Whenever you're being talked to by a coach or whenever you're in a group of people, you go to the front. Mm-hmm. You make eye contact with them. You set the example for everybody else. By the way, you don't have to be an extrovert to do that. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be a leader. Lead by example. That's all I care about. I don't care if I hear your voice. I want you to be a leader in the room. And you know what? This is what sports does for you, whether you realize it or not. I don't care how shy you are. I don't care how introverted you are. I don't care how extroverted you are. When you step outside of the sports world and into life, it just does something to you. Mm-hmm. So, Jillian, you know how much of an introvert she is. She leads by example, right? Mm-hmm. So now, and this just happened as she's finishing up her master's degree, this just happened. Now imagine the old Jillian Casey that you know, standing up in front of a whole room of people, delivering a presentation in front of 30 to 45 people.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, nobody would ever think of her standing up and doing that, right? Mm-hmm. That's what happens. Guess what just happened? It happened just because it happens. It's because of the leadership qualities that you don't even know you're building when you're playing a sport, especially collegiately, as you know, that help you in everything else that you do. You just bring a different level of confidence, to the unspoken confidence, to the conversation. That allows you to apply all the things that we talk about, all the things that we just talked about on this podcast.
Yeah.
But my point is, you don't you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. So now, whenever she's on camera, whenever you're on camera, whenever you're in front of people, whenever you're talking to people in any kind of environment, just the way you bring yourself to that conversation is different than the way a lot of people bring themselves to the conversation. Because guess what? An interview is like game day. A presentation is like game day. Guess what you do during game day? You're in a different frame of mind. It's a different deal, right? Well, it's the same thing when you show up for an interview. Because guess what? When you're playing softball, Allie, when you put the helmet on, there's nobody else inside that helmet except for you. You have the license to be sort of introverted at that time, right? Because you got a helmet on and you're in game day. Well, guess what? When you got a basketball in your hand and it's game day, it's just you and your thoughts. So what I think really happens is that, and this is the beauty of sports. I don't care what level you play. It doesn't matter to me. The beauty of sports is that if you allow it, the things that you learn will take you places that you never, ever thought you'd go. And the skills that you learn, you don't even know you're learning. You don't even know that they're giving you a competitive advantage out there.
Yeah. And I think that's the main part you just hit on the head, is if you allow it. Right, because you can go through athletics and not want any adversity to happen to you and just want a linear path and make it on the other side and say, yep, I really did that. But as you were talking through all that, one thing that came to mind for me is comfort zone. So I think when you talked about, being an athlete just gives you this next level of confidence when you enter the real world, per se. To me, it was being forced time and time again, at least once every day in college, to step out of my comfort zone, see that I could either, one, fail through it and get better, or two, succeed at it. Now, when I come across something in the real world, like, I'm almost comfortable being uncomfortable in my comfort zone because it's a familiar place. Even though it's uncomfortable, I've proved to myself time and time again that I'm going to get out of it and I'm going to get back through it. So, for example, like Jill's speech, right? Probably in the moment, little uncomfortable, but she knew she'd get through it because she's gotten through uncomfortable things before. And that makes me so happy for her. I'm proud of her too.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But you know what you're talking about? So, Paul, I'm going to talk about another thing that I've talked to your group about. The mindset that you just walked us through right there, Allie, is something that we in the business world call it situational leadership. So the situational leadership curve. So think about your college playing career. And I tell this, Jill and I have talked about this as well. Think about your college playing career. So you start out at the left-hand side of the curve in a phase that we call S1. And that's the phase where you don't even know what you don't know. So you enter your college career, you don't know what you don't know at that point. It's all just coming to you. You're drinking from a fire hose most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's say as a freshman, oh my gosh, you don't know what you don't know. Then all of a sudden you transition into your sophomore year. Well, by the time you get to your sophomore year, you know you don't know. You have a very clear understanding that you have no idea what you're doing, right? Very clear idea. But then all of a sudden you get to the top of that curve when you get to your junior year, and now all of a sudden you're starting to go down the other side of the slope, right? And you go into the third phase of situational leadership where, all right, now, and this is the most dangerous part, you know. I know what I'm doing. Then you travel through that part, and then you get to the tail end of your career. So now you get to your senior year. Now you're doing it unconsciously. Now you don't even know that you know.
I love that.
But that's so situational leadership. It's just look it up, Google it, folks. I mean, it's a real metaphor for a lot of things. Like when I'm communicating my resume, I think of my resume like a situational leadership curve. At the beginning of my career, I had no idea what I'm doing. Well, now I'm toward the end of my career. I mean, I don't even know I'm doing it half the time. I mean, it's just become unconscious. You know what I mean? Yeah. But that's now, okay, so you've completed that curve for your collegiate career. You're working through that curve. You're starting all over again. You're working through that curve now professionally. And as you go through time and you become better at what you do, however you define that, you'll make your way through that curve.
Yeah, and the thing that just stuck out to me, and I want to hear my dad's opinion on this too, is I think sometimes when you get to that phase 3 or phase 4, like I know what I'm doing or I subconsciously do, we forget how it felt to be in phase 1 and phase 2. So we just assume that everybody should be where I am. And I don't know how you could possibly feel like that when really 2 years ago or X amount of years ago, you were right there too. So for both of you, I guess, how important is that awareness of remembering how you felt and having that perspective to be able to better lead other people no matter where they're at along that curve?
I've been going through it recently with high school ball. You want to bring younger players up to the varsity team, and everybody thinks it's the greatest opportunity in the world, but they're scared, or they don't know what they don't know. They paint a different picture of what it might actually be like, right? Then they get up there and they don't necessarily put themselves out there because they're so worried about everything. And then, a couple of years later, they're just doing it subconsciously. And as a coach, the important thing I'm trying to tell the upperclassmen is to try to remember that when we bring people up. Did I explain that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think sometimes, Paul, I'll just say it this way. Don't let yourself skip steps.
Mm-hmm.
You can't skip steps. I don't care if you're talking about sports. I don't care if you're talking about your career. I don't care if you're talking about learning a new skill. You're coaching now, Allie. That's a whole new skill for you, right? That requires a different curve altogether. Yeah. But you can't get to S4 until you go through S2. You can't get there. Now, in your mind, you might think you're there, but you can't fake it. You can't get there until you've gone through the other parts of the curve. You have to, and this is also a challenge that I would throw out there for everybody. Force yourself. We talk about comfort zones, right? So force yourself outside of your comfort zone, because forcing yourself outside of your comfort zone and into new experiences, it forces you to be in that S1 category again. It forces you to say to yourself, okay, I really don't know what I don't know right now. And that can be a really fun thing, because, we reference it in our world as learning agility, right? Learning agility and transferable skills. Well, you've done it time and time again, so you can do it again. So you force yourself into different curves all the time. Mm-hmm. But when you get in that curve, so for example, Al, you're just starting a coaching journey. Well, mm-hmm. If your mentality is, well, I already know everything, there's nothing else anybody can teach me. Yeah. In your head, you're in that S4 phase. You're in that unconscious phase. You're in that I already know what the heck I'm doing phase. Mm-hmm. But you might not be. You might not know what you're doing. And then that's hurting everybody else.
Because to me, getting to that S4 phase is a privilege. Like, you have to earn that. Because if you just start in your subconscious, you're not doing it to the best of your ability. Like, I almost think you're reverting back to whatever you work towards. And you could be subconsciously doing something at 50% because you didn't go through the whole curve. Whereas you want to be doing it at 100%. Yep. So, and the other piece of that when you were talking is, I think one of the most dangerous pieces of that too, as well, as the S2, where we say, oh, I know, I don't know. Because I think a lot of times that's when people quit. They just say, well, I don't know. And they're not willing to put in the work to get to S3. They're not willing to get over the hump and say, okay, I know I don't know, but I want to know.
Yep.
They just say, oh, I don't know. That's too hard.
I think what I'm hearing with this is when you hear things like, oh, they never reached their full potential. Oh, they didn't
Mhm.
get as much. I don't know. I think you can fight through. You can get stuck on one stage or the other. Am I right with that?
Oh yeah, you can. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. Or not only can you get stuck, you can get stuck if you stop working at it,
Mhm.
right? If you make the decision to stop working at it when you get stuck, that's where you're going to be with that particular skill that you're talking about. And Paul, I think a lot of the challenge that many folks have, especially in the coaching world, is how do you make how do you make somebody realize? How do you make an athlete realize? Or in my world, how do I make somebody I work with realize that, you know what, right now you're in that phase where you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. That's all right. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Because that's where it's uncomfortable. I mean, we're human beings too, right? And it's super uncomfortable for me too.
Mhm.
But you've got to be willing to be in that first phase and embrace it and own it. And sometimes we need people, whether it's coaches or colleagues, to sit down with us and say, listen, this is where you are, and it's where you should be right now.
Mhm.
So now let's work together. Let's build a plan to get you to that next phase of that curve.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to too, and I know we've talked about this on a previous episode. I think a lot of people sometimes get in the mindset of, oh, I overcame adversity and now I'm all set. I'm set for life now. Instead of, to me, like how you define success is now who got through that curve the fastest and is just chilling in that subconscious stage. It's who's willing to start over the quickest. Like
That's
who
exactly right.
achieved it and then who's willing to be uncomfortable again and not just not that being said, you should kind of sit and be proud of yourself for what you've accomplished, but then like get hungry and get after it again. Don't just sit there and say, well, I really overcame that 3 years ago and I'm really proud of myself. So I don't want to feel like that again. So I'm just gonna stay comfortable where I'm at.
Yep, yep, yep. Don't let yourself get complacent, and it's much easier said than done. By the way, I mean,
Mhm.
it's super easy for us to sit here and talk about this stuff, but it's very difficult to do sometimes. And I'm a card carrying member of that group. I mean, it's not easy to go through that at all, at
Well,
all.
we go right back to what you said in the opening, process over product. It's one of my favorite
Hmm.
things because I'll ask athletes all the time or other coaches, like, what's success mean to you, right? And I think the danger is that success they're trying to describe to me is the product, right? And what success really should be is, am I sticking to a process? Am I competing? Am I handling adversity? Am I going through all the phases of situational leadership? I mean, you
Yeah.
can plug in whatever you want,
Oh yeah.
but
Oh yeah.
we sit there and try to measure the outcome instead of measure the work we put in. And you might always not reach what you think success, but if you have the right process, you're going to be successful more than you're not. Like you're going to like the product that's delivered most of
Yeah.
the time. Maybe
Yes.
I can't give a percentage to it,
No.
but
That's right.
you're going to
That's
win
right.
more than you lose, right?
Yep. Yep.
We
Yep. And
forget
it,
that.
and it goes back to that mindset, Paul. That the whole process over product mentality is something that quite frankly I learned from Inky Johnson. We've talked about him a lot, right? And you and I follow
Yep,
him
yep.
both. I mean, just unbelievable content. But another one of the things that he says, and I think this fits the conversation that we're having right now, can you be committed to something long term at a level that you said you were committed to it in the beginning? Because it's easy to be committed to something in the beginning, but can you remain committed to something that you said you were committed to at the same level that you were committed to it when you first said it? That's the hardest part, right? So I mean, think about this. It's easy to it's easy to play sports. It's easy to play softball. It's easy to get into a game and to strike out 3 times and then to come back to the bench and to go home that night and say, you know what, damn it, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to work my butt off to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go to bed and then you get up in the morning and it's just rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Almost like you never had that thought. And then you wonder why you strike out 3 more times in the next game. Mm-hmm. Right. And you can plug that into basketball. You can plug that into any other sport. So can you be committed to something that you said you were committed to in the beginning at the same level, with the same passion that you said you were committed to it when you first said it?
Yeah.
That's hard.
And going off that analogy too, with the softball you were using, I think something that can happen a lot of times too is, let's say you have that thought at night and then the next day, the next week, you work really, really hard at it. And then you see good results. Yep. And then you go back to what you were doing. So yep. Now you go right back down, right? Yep. So you can't forget what got you there. Like you have to keep doing that to maintain those results, or right. else you're just going to go like this, which happens yep. most of the time anyway, yep. right? But if you just forget the hard work that got you there, it's not going to be sustainable. At least I don't think so.
Yep. And that goes back to, believe it or not, I really wasn't good at math in school or anything like that. But there is that whole concept of a bell-shaped curve, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, Paul, I've said this to your class. So the story that I always like to tell folks is when I was first hired with my company, I'll never forget the very first director that I had said, okay, I'm gonna give you this example and I want you to tell me what your answer is. No matter what you do, you have a bell-shaped curve. I don't care if you're in business. I don't care if you're in sports. I don't care if you coach. You got a bell-shaped curve. So you got your low performers at the left. You got your high performers in the right. And you got 80% of everybody in the middle, somewhere in the middle of that bell-shaped curve. So the question that I was asked when I was first hired was, okay, Tom, you've got a team of 12 people. You've got 2 on the left. You've got 2 on the right. The rest of them are in the middle. Who are you spending your most time with? So me, thinking that I knew everything, I said, well, heck, that's easy. I'm spending most of my time with the 2 people who are on the left, these low performers, because man, oh man, if I can just get these people better at what they do, then guess what? That'll make my life a whole lot easier. And I looked at him with a big smile on my face, and he looked at me and he said, wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong. You're dead wrong. What you're going to do is spend most of your time with the people who are on the right side of that bell-shaped curve, your top performers, because 2 reasons. Number one, remember, if you spend the more time you spend with those lower performers, they may be lower performers for a reason, and they're going to sap all the energy you got. They're going to take everything that you have to get them to where you want them to be. Whereas spending most of your time with your high performers, now follow this analogy. What that will do is pull your bell-shaped curve to the right, rather than hoping someone else, like your low performers, push that bell-shaped curve to the right. So if your high performers are leading by example and they pull that bell-shaped curve to the right, guess who they pull with them?
Everybody.
Now all of a sudden those low performers, okay, so those people in the middle who are average performers, when you pull that thing to the right, more of them fall into the high performer category, and then you pull those low performers into the middle category, and you've got a more productive team.
Yeah, and using the word team, my mind went right to coaching too, I think, in that analogy, because I think you have to pour time into the people who are on your bus, for lack of better terms, right? And they're going to be the ones driving it. And that's what the power of leadership is going to do. They're going to take people along with them, right? And that resonated with me too, right? If you're spending your time on the two to that other side of the curve, it is going to drain the energy out of you so fast. And there's going to be none left for the people who deserve it, for lack of better terms, who deserve your top energy.
And oh, by the way, what are those high performers going to think?
Yeah.
Of you spending all of your time?
And they will. So this is perfect. I saw this today. We're going to end with this. You can give me your thoughts on it both, but everything we've talked about today, and the same reason I know we all do podcasts and like to hang out with the people we like to hang out with, because tonight I've learned a lot. I've been reminded a lot. I get energized by a lot of what we talked about. But what I read today, it said, if you hang around 5 confident people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang around 5 smart people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang around 5 millionaires, you'll be the 6th. And if you hang around 5 idiots, you'll be the 6th. And the iron sharpens iron thing. And I think everything we've talked about kind of relates to that. What are your thoughts on that as we finish up? I was trying to find a way to, we've talked about so much tonight, wrapping it up, but I think that kind of does it. Thoughts?
I'll throw this thought out there, and Allie, I'll throw it to you to wrap this thing up. But it's that old saying, you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. I really believe that is true. Keep your circle small. Keep your circle small. And just remember that you're an average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And we talk about networks all the time, right? And Paul, I just spent an entire class period with 2 of your classes talking about the importance of networking, right?
Yep.
Well, guess what? There's such a thing as a bad one. So you get to decide if it's a good or a bad.
Yeah, and going off that, I had someone tell me one time too, because everyone likes to be the smartest in the room, right? Everybody naturally likes to feel like they're in control. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're not in the right room. And I think sometimes we need to be reminded of that too. Like, I want people to challenge me. So when we talk about getting outside my comfort zone, if I'm just kind of relaxed and doing what I'm doing and I feel great and I'm not challenging myself, I want people in my circle to say, Allie, I think you should do that. I think you should try this. I think you should take the leap here. And I want people to have similar values in that and push me to do what they know I'm able to do. So I think sometimes when we talk about, that bell curve S1 to S4, are the people I'm surrounding with helping me get through that as well? Are they helping me get on a new curve? Are they helping me get out of my comfort zone again? Or are they keeping me stuck with them in one of those seasons? Oh, we don't know. We're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I don't know. Do you want to help me figure it out?
Well, sometimes think about it, to your point, Allie. Sometimes people are afraid to be in the rooms where they're not the smartest people in the room because it forces them to go all the way back to the beginning of that curve again, right? So now all of a sudden, boy, oh boy, now I have to admit that I don't know what I don't know. And, the thing that I always tell the folks that I talk to in my world is try and put yourself in a room you're not qualified to be in. And it's sort of the same kind of conversation that we're having right here. But this is good stuff. You guys are doing great stuff. This is awesome. I've listened to every single one of these things.
Thank you.
I really have. And Paul, I also want to make special note of the fact that this might be the 3rd podcast in a row that I've done with you where I haven't mentioned chop wood, carry water. I just wanted to
now you just did, so you got to tell
them. I know.
You got to tell them what it means.
You know what? I might listen to that again. Every morning it's podcasts or books on my morning walk running. That's a good
quick one too. It's a quick read. If I could just ask everybody, I'm telling you, wherever you get your books, wherever you're listening to your books, wherever you read them, I don't care where it is. Get Chop Wood, Carry Water. Joshua Medcalf is the author. You will not regret it. It's one of the best reads. I listen to it at least once or twice a year. At least once or twice.
My favorite tweets when you just do like the axe, the wood, and the water. That's
in
it.
the water bucket.
Yeah.
Water bucket.
That's like me when I'll just randomly tweet a carrot and egg and a bunch of coffee beans, and everything.
That's right. Hey,
I did something the other day.
Every time you win a softball game, my final thought of the day would just be water in a water bucket. How about that?
I like that. I like that.
Awesome.
Tom, thank you. Allie, always a pleasure.
Yes.
And we'll talk real soon. I know you'll be on again in the near future. Maybe we'll get Jillian on when she's settled in.
Oh, please. Hey, please do. She'll be living on her own. Why not?
Yeah.
She'll have nothing else to do.
Yes.
We'll let her get settled in.
And she loves public speaking now, so it'll be
She
awesome.
loves public speaking now. Absolutely. And she will be more than when you tell her that I told you to tell her that, she's going to be thrilled.
She'll be fine.
By the way.
That's awesome.
She'll be fine.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Tom, take care. We'll see you.
Bye. Yep. Later.